Managers, April 24, 2025. Present at the dais are Managers Miller and Sando and White and Maxwell. We expect the others to join us very shortly. Is there any member of the public here who is here for an item not on the agenda? No, okay. Moving on to approving the agenda, there's a couple of changes I want to add. We're going to put in a new item 12.1, which would be to include a short briefing from the permitting team that we didn't get to in committee. And then 12.2 and 12.3 will be considered, we'll renumber these, and will be considered at the end of the agenda after 13 and 14. With those changes, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell seconds. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the April 10th board meeting and approval of the check registers for the general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, it moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson seconds. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I had two meetings to report on. I just attended the Metro Watersheds meeting remotely. Manager Olson will report, and Manager Maxwell was there as well. And also yesterday was the State of the Parks the Three Rivers Park District had. And Managers Sando and Maxwell and I were all there. So we can say a few words about that. The theme of the speech that Commissioner Chair Gibbs gave was collaboration, and that certainly rings a bell with us. And in the room were the collaborators. They had county and city and other watersheds and community organizations, so it was really well-represented community take. Manager Sando, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Madam President. On Thursday, Shirley and her husband Jim, Jean, and Samantha, and I attended the Three Rivers State of the Park meeting, and it was an overview of last year's accomplishments. Extremely very well run. Also, Congresswoman Omar was in attendance as well, which was nice to see. For those who don't know this, I'm familiar with Three Rivers Park District, but the Three Rivers Park District strongly supports state funding for water quality improvement projects for impaired water bodies, as well as continued protection and restoration of critical wetland habitat in the metro region. They've become and are very good partners of MCWD to work with. It was a very good meeting. It was a breakfast meeting, well done, and ended on time.
That's true.
Good food and ended on time.
well
What
run,
more can you
yeah.
ask?
Did you want to add anything, Manager Maxwell?
no.
Okay. Manager Miller, can you give the Planning and Policy Committee report, please?
We had a discussion about the water quality improvements at 325 Lake Road. And we had a robust discussion about timing and extent of the improvements, and but we didn't make any decisions to forward to the board. It was information.
Thank you. Manager Olson, the Minnesota Watersheds Metro meeting.
Yes, I had the opportunity to lead that meeting, and the longest, well, we had two major presentations, one from the League of Women Voters, who I understand now we have been helping and coaching. They're very interested in learning about watersheds and the role that their vote plays in the work that we do. And so they are reaching out to every watershed in the state and providing an update to all of their membership in a formal presentation that they'll be doing. The other detailed presentation, we actually had three presenters, was from the Minnesota Department of Transportation and how they work with watersheds to coordinate projects that they're doing. And one of the things I saw, which was really impressive, is this map with all the segments of road that are planned to be worked on over the next 5 years. And what a beautiful piece of messaging when you can take a look at that and go, oh, there's 3 segments of road. Let's zero down and see if there's anything there that we need to be involved with. So one of them was the Highway 5 project that we're working on, and we're very heavily involved with them at a very early stage. So as well as 11 out in the Carver Park area. So that was really a nice version of who the people are that we're talking to on the other end of the phone when we're partnering with them. And finally, there was a presentation from the folks from the MPCA, Stormwater Management, as well as the new dates for our political agendas and initiatives. Instead of waiting until December when we have our annual conference, we're going to be finalizing all of those initiatives well before December so that they can get into the early legislative timeframe. So it was a good meeting. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing, appreciate that. Upcoming meeting and event schedule is in the agenda, including our normally scheduled programs, as they say. And then Manager Miller will be our liaison to the CAC meeting on the 14th of May. And now we can move to item 11.1, which is the financial audit and fund transfers for 2024. Recognize Mr. Herring.
Help Mr. Herring pull the presentation up here. I can barely see the mouse.
Yeah. You should have it memorized.
Yeah.
Where does it say, somebody with better eyes, where does it say view full screen? Just can't, I honestly just can't see. There it is, I can see it. I'm blaming glare, there was a little bit of a glare.
All right. We heard someone else talking about glasses earlier tonight.
We'll have Mr. Herring walk.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Nice to recognize several familiar faces. My name's Andy Herring from Redpath and Company, the CPA firm that you hired to audit your 2024 financial statements. We issued the audit 1 week ago today, and I'm here to present the results. So this first report we see up here, a communication with those charged with governance letter. It's a letter from the auditor to the commissioners of a variety of required communications. Nothing substantial in this letter. It references the accounting policies of Minnehaha Creek, which are in note 1 to the financial statements. Highlights that there were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit, no disagreements with management or staff or anyone we worked with. So very good news there. The audit overall went quite smoothly, working with staff here as well as staff from AEM. Overall, a smooth audit process. Next, the financial statement, the document here. I'll skip ahead to the opinion on the financial statements. The first paragraph defines what we audited, the financial statements of Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for the year ended December 31st, 2024. The second paragraph, in our opinion, the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects. So that's audit lingo, an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, the highest level of opinion you can receive. Fairly stated in all material respects. We audit on a concept of materiality or something significant enough that would affect the decisions of the financial statement user. But the audit isn't designed to audit down to the nearest dollar. We're not auditing every single transaction, but we're looking for those material misstatements. Did not find any. So it's a clean opinion, you passed. Following the opinion on the financial statements is a management's discussion and analysis, which was staff's opportunity to describe what happened during the year, why certain revenues or expenditures increased or decreased. That provides a highlight to the financial activity. Following that, we get into the financial statements, and there's two sets of financial statements. The first, commonly referred to as a full accrual financial statements. This includes the capital assets or the fixed assets of the organization, as well as its long-term debt. The second set of financial statements, one that you're probably a little more familiar with looking at on a month-to-month basis, modified accrual accounting financial statements, focuses more on a near-term basis. A couple of things, or one thing to point out here, the cash balance did increase by about $4.5 million during 2024. Over on the income statement, fund balance increased by about $4.7 million, primarily related to unspent project funds during the year. There was a $4.3 million transfer into the capital finance fund for future projects. And I know you have a 15-year capital improvement plan, so there's some well thought out plans there for future uses of those funds. It's not just, oh, we had extra this year. There's definitely some thought that goes into how those spent funds will be used. Following the financial statements there, footnotes, nothing too noteworthy here. Again, note one is the accounting policies. There's deposits, investments. Note two, here's the capital assets. Long-term debt, this is a little difficult to see. The next page does show that long-term debt, the bonds owed to Hennepin County, and then there's debt to the city of Richfield as well as Bremer Bank. Beginning balance, about $9.2 million. $900,000 was paid off during the year to bring the balance down to about $8.3 million at the end of the year. No new debt was issued, and you continue to pay off the debt that you have outstanding. The final payment is due in 2034. Following some more footnotes is a budgetary comparison statement. This is probably the best snapshot of the year if you want to dig into the numbers. This presents both the original and final budget, as well as the actual amount, and a comparison with the budget, and also prior year data is here. So again, this shows how expenditures were about twice the amount budget, the $14.5 million of budgeted expenditures, but only $6.6 million was actually spent during the year. Following, and then in the back, or there's supplemental information on each of the sub-funds, I'll call them, one of which is I can't really see it from here, but I guess on the far right, that capital finance fund did receive a $4.3 million transfer, now has a $14.5 million balance at the end of the year. Next is our report on internal controls, or the policies and procedures of Minnehaha Creek. It's not our responsibility, and we don't audit those policies and procedures every year, but we're definitely paying attention to them, reviewing them as we perform and plan the audit, really looking for any deficiencies in those policies and procedures. For example, we're looking to see if expenditures were appropriately approved, looking to see that there's a proper segregation of duties, or that no one person has too much authority or responsibility in any certain area. And then on the back end, review of monthly financial reports, for example, that's a control as well. So we looked at that throughout the audit and did not note any deficiencies. And the last report here, a Minnesota legal compliance report. This is based on a guide that the state auditor issues that we complete as part of the audit. A guide of quite a few various statutes that we test for compliance as part of the audit. And we did not note any items of noncompliance. So all in all, a clean opinion, no audit findings, and really no issues to report. Again, a smooth audit and everything went well. So kind of a boring result from your auditor, but I think that's okay.
We'll take that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Herring, and
welcome.
thanks to our accountant and staff as well who've worked on this. Anybody want to ask a question at this point? We'll move to the resolutions here in a moment.
I'm not going to vote for the resolution. I didn't see the audit before tonight, so, I think it would be the courtesy to have the board review it first and have the the treasurer and chairman and whoever else have a separate meeting with the auditor to make sure that we're hearing any concerns that they may have.
It was in the packet, so it was available, and it's my fault. I'll take the responsibility for not calling the executive committee meeting. I was ill last week. It just skipped my mind.
Yeah. I didn't
And
see it.
typically, there is a meeting that
Yeah.
the treasurer's not involved in.
Yeah.
And have
The other
That-
three
that's
officers.
right.
Yeah.
My apologies. That's my fault.
I'm not voting for it. I haven't seen it, so.
All right.
I was able to read the
I did as well.
entire transmission.
Then we'll turn to Mr. Whisker on the resolutions.
And I would ask, maybe Andy knows off the top of his head, or legal counsel, what's your statutory obligation? What time period do we have to, does the board have to consider?
As far as the state auditor, the reports are due on by June 30th.
Okay. You want to provide more time, and if there are questions, Mr. Herring's here for questions this evening. Otherwise, I can. The resolutions as they're outlined in the packet.
Manager Miller, your preference?
I'm just going to abstain from the vote. Not prepared. I haven't seen it.
Very good. So resolution 2525 in the board packet is for the board's acceptance of the audit, and simply directs the administrator to transfer auditor, the board of water and soil Carver counties. And I don't think there's much editorial to add to what Redpath and Mr. Herring and Abdo have put together. Just to say it's the continue to get tighter and tighter on budget to actual. The audit's gotten cleaner and cleaner. We've had clean audit every year for many years that I've been here, but the small footnotes around sureties and those other things that auditors recommending that we clean up, those continue to not be things through the presentation. I think while they've all been clean, the only editorial that I'd add, and then word for myself, the
Thank you. First of all, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2525?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Are there questions? Very well. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution
Will
25-0.
I be recorded as
Oh, I'm sorry,
not
yes.
voting?
6 to 1, motion carries. The
Actually,
next
one
resolution,
abstention.
26. I'm sorry?
One abstention. It was
An abstention, not 6 to 1, but an abstention. Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, thank you, President White. Resolution 2526 approves fund transfers and closures, which is something that we do. The audit comes to close. We have 4 fund closures that are outlined in the resolution, 1 fund transfer in the amount of $33,608 from capital finance into the FEMA flood repair. You'll recall we provided a couple of briefings on this, and the board had received information on the information portion previously about the return of federal funds, 14 flood damages that were.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt 25026? Thank you, Manager Hejmati. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus, questions? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
And anyone abstaining?
No, I didn't abstain.
You voted in favor of the fund transfers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
I just wanted to call.
Yes.
Good job.
Yeah, yes.
It's really outstanding. Outstanding.
Thank you, Manager Hejmati. We'll move to item 11.2, which is the County Road 6 Pond Retrofit Project. Ms. Sanis and Ms. Cermak presenting.
You can just minimize.
Alrighty. Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Excited to be in front of you regarding the County Road 6 Pond Retrofit Project. We have 3 items requiring board consideration tonight under this agenda item. We're going to follow a really similar structure that we did 2 weeks ago for the East Auburn project. I'm going to provide a bit of background and overview of the 90% design elements, and then I'll turn it over to Veronica, who will introduce the district permit. For the project, as a reminder, we always route our own project's permit through the board for transparency. So the board will consider approval of that permit before turning it back to me, where I'll walk through kind of the remaining items on the list, and we'll get to those final 2 resolutions. So as a reminder, the County Road 6 project fits under our broader strategy for the Long Lake Creek subwatershed and is identified in our Long Lake Creek roadmap, where we have also identified a full suite of opportunity areas that fall into one of these 3 categories here. And we've prioritized regional treatment in the near term because of its degree of impact on the downstream water bodies. County Road 6 rose to the top of that list because in parallel, our monitoring data indicated that the pond was underperforming and we were seeing high particulate phosphorus concentrations leaving the system. We pursued feasibility in 2023 with Stantec, which led to our recommendation of a stacked strategy of us strengthening that center berm in the pond to further define the pond's 2 cells and encourage additional settling in that north cell, and also installing a gravity sand filter bench to remove that fine particulate phosphorus that is not settling out through ponding alone. We've worked through design over the last year to reach this exciting kind of 90% milestone stage. In total, the design retrofits reduce loading to the downstream Long Lake by approximately 40 pounds of phosphorus per year. I was last in front of you back in September, so it's been a bit with the 60% design update. And at that time, we had focused on just a few areas where we had kind of the most outstanding questions. Tonight, though, I do want to walk through kind of each project element and provide a high-level summary of the changes coming to the pond and the associated benefits with each. I want to start with where we had probably the most uncertainty at 60%, which was around this potential opportunity to expand the pond in the northwest corner. Just as a reminder, the original construction and grading was heavily constrained back in the 90s by that property boundary in the northwest corner. And so to manage the ponded water, we had constructed and graded kind of a high point berm along that property line there. And so as we progressed into design, we realized that continuing to work around this constraint was suboptimal and directly actually at odds with our project goals of improving phosphorus removal. So at 60%, we had forecasted to the board that we were going to explore design alternatives and actually kind of expand the pond and start conversations with the property owners, the Epleys. We were able to reach mutually beneficial terms, which I will touch on later on in the presentation, that would give us construction access and long-term flowage rights that we need over the property. And so that gave us confidence to carry the expansion into 90% design, which you can see here. So I'll touch on just the details of the terms again later, but to highlight the details of the design, the pond expansion is 0.12 acres of kind of new water coming to the pond. Overall, this is increasing our treatment capacity, giving us additional settling abilities in that north cell. When we think about the pond as a whole, this northwest expansion is helping us offset the flood storage that we're losing from the filter going in place. And we're also able to directly route the local roadside runoff from County Road 6 kind of right into the pond. The expansion and the associated landowner agreement also allow us to tie in the improved berm into kind of the natural grade on the site. So that's going to look really natural. And in total, the berm change here isn't overly drastic to the naked eye. The berm is raising overall by 1 foot, with the largest change coming in that the flow opening area between the two cells. We're going to see an increase of 3.5 feet there from what it is today. And really the goal here is just to hold more water back in that first cell and encourage additional settling in the north cell kind of as like a forebay. So as water passes over the center berm, it reaches the southern cell where it is able to access the filter. And before I read you into the details of our filter bench, I think this is a helpful graphic just to understand how the pond water interacts with the filter. So step one is water rises in the pond and it has access and the ability to flow over the filter media. Then it can filter vertically through the sand, and that filtering there is what's giving us that particulate phosphorus removal, so it's falling out in the sand. And then it accesses a drain tile network that'll sit at the bottom of the filter where it can travel out and kind of back into the natural system. So taking a look at the County Road 6 filter bench, it's just over 11,000 square feet in size, largely sitting inside kind of the existing pond footprint today. The drain tile network is comprised of 7 individual 6-inch tile pipes, all designed with their own clean-out structure that gives us kind of that maintenance ability to flush them if needed. And they're also designed to ensure that where they daylight in that downstream area, they're not going to be sitting in submerged water. Here's kind of a nice picture of what it will look like mid-construction when we kind of build the filter area, lay that drain tile network, and start to layer the filter media on top. One last design element I'd like to draw your attention to with the filter is this kind of raised lip we have bordering the filter on the pond side. This is kind of a pea gravel raised edge, and over time we're going to see emergent vegetation grow along the edge of the filter. That's by design. We want to have kind of a natural vegetated screen that's going to prevent kind of floating debris from moving on top of the filter and should help with some maintenance throughout the summer. So now we will turn to the proposed modifications to the weir, which are both of which are essential to the filter bench actually functioning the way it's designed. So as the weir sits today, water drains through the low flow openings that you can see here on the left, and it also overtops when needed from that overflow cap that you can see on the right. Both of those outlet elevations currently are below where our filter bench is designed to sit. So in order to get water on top of that filter, we need to do 2 things to the weir. First, we need to plug those low flow openings so that our filter can actually act as the new low flow outlet for the pond. And then we also need to extend the height of the weir's overflow. So to plug the low flow openings, we're going to be removing the fish screens that are currently in there and replace those just with solid plates. And so that will kind of block the water from outletting there. And then kind of shown this long line in red here, we'll be welding an extension plate to the entire face of the weir to give it that 1 foot extension, and that will allow the pond water to bounce enough to get on top of the filter during those rain events. Last but not least, I want to provide the board an update on the maintenance dredging that we had proposed to do in conjunction with the retrofit project. So at 60%, we highlighted that there might be kind of a stacked benefit to doing this alongside, since the pond will be fully drained and we'll have equipment on site. To look into this, we did have to have the sediment tested. And fortunately for us, it is not contaminated. So it's not subject to specific disposal requirements and reduces kind of the overall cost associated with it. While this is a proactive dredging, we're still removing just shy of 3,000 cubic yards of material. And this is all being removed from the north cell. That's where we saw kind of a majority of that accumulated sediment. And just to give you an idea, in some spots in the north cell, we saw 3 to 4 feet of sediment built up from the 90s. So there's a lot to be removed in there. And it'll be great to kind of get it back to its original kind of full treatment capacity. All right, I'll turn it over.
Ms. Samus.
Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Thanks, Kaylee, for the introduction. And we'll now be moving on to permit 25-141 for the district-led project. Again, this permit is being brought before you because it is a district-led project. But staff and the district engineer have reviewed the project, and it does meet all rule requirements. To start off, we wanted to go over some of the different water bodies associated with the project. The County Road 6 stormwater pond was built in what was originally a DNR public water course until the pond was constructed. And the pond's origin is a bit unique, so its classification is a bit unique as well. It doesn't fall under district definitions of a water body, which is defined as a wetland, water course, or water basin. The pond does not meet wetland parameters and is no longer a water course, and does not meet the definition of a water basin, which is defined as a natural depression. And this pond is not natural, but a constructed stormwater pond. That being said, there are water courses both upstream and downstream of the pond, and wetlands in the northwest and southeastern corners. And parts of the project do come in contact with these, and therefore additional rules are applicable there. And after that preface, I'll move into the rule analysis for the project. Because the project disturbs more than 5,000 square feet of land and will be moving more than 50 cubic yards of soil, the erosion control rule is applicable. The erosion control plan includes a construction entrance with perimeter control to prevent sedimentation downstream, a floating silt curtain, and stabilization across all disturbed areas. And staff have reviewed the erosion control plan and found it meets all rule requirements. The proposed drain tile that Kaylee mentioned below the filter bench outlets into the southeastern wetland, coming in contact with the wetlands bank and therefore triggering the water body crossings and structures rule. The project has been reviewed by staff and the district engineer and found to meet all rule criteria, such as maintaining hydraulic and navigational capacity. The project also does not prohibit wildlife passage or promote erosion, and it also meets the minimal impact criteria. The project also involves both excavation and fill within the floodplain of the downstream watercourse, therefore triggering the floodplain alteration rule. Here you can see the watercourse in dark blue and its floodplain in light blue. The project proposes 140 cubic yards of excavation to allow for the drain tile to outlet into that southeastern wetland, and 6 cubic yards of fill to tie into the access road. This results in 136 cubic yards of net floodplain storage, therefore meeting the rule. The rule also requires that any fill within a watercourse meets the no-rise standard, and the district engineer has reviewed the modeling for this project and found that it meets that criteria as well. There are 2 areas of the project with applicable wetland regulations on site. The first one is the northwest corner, which is regulated under the Wetland Conservation Act, or WACA. In the city of Orono, the district typically has WACA permitting authority, but to streamline regulatory process with DNR permitting, who is also permitting this project, the district has waived WACA jurisdiction to the DNR for this project. And these impacts, shown in the red and green, are expected to be reviewed under an exemption for soil and water conservation projects. The yellow on the map has been delineated as a man-made or incidental wetland, which is now wet because of the grading under the original pond construction. This delineation is also going to be subject for the WACA review. And then moving to the southeastern wetland, there's also excavation occurring in the southeast wetland that is not regulated by WACA, but is regulated by the district using the same exemption standards. Therefore, this area will also fall under the same soil and water exemption as the northwest corner. And because the proposed drain tile will outlet into the southeastern wetland and is being reviewed under the Water Body Crossings and Structures Rule, a buffer is required around the entire wetland. However, this area is already buffered by a previous subdivision permit, and all of the area will continue to be vegetated and meet buffer requirements. Here you can see one of the photos of the wetland buffer signs that's currently up there and the vegetated buffer around the wetland. So, therefore, the project meets all wetland protection rule requirements as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the stormwater pond doesn't meet the district definitions of a water body. However, the dredging rule applicability is based on DNR public water classification and not district definitions. The County Road 6 pond is in the DNR public water inventory, and therefore the dredging rule does apply. As Kaylee mentioned, the project proposes 2,780 cubic yards of maintenance dredging in the location shown in blue. The project meets all dredging rule requirements as 3-to-1 side slopes. Although there's not fish spawning here, the project is not occurring during fish spawning, and while a soil disposal site has not been identified at this point, it's recommended that that soil disposal site that meets rule requirements be a condition of the permit as well. In summary, permit 25-141, where the County Road 6 pond retrofit triggers the district's erosion control, water body crossings, floodplain alteration, wetland protection, and dredging rules. The project is before the board tonight because it's a district-led project, and the project meets all rule requirements, and staff recommends approval with the conditions listed in the permit report. I'm also happy to take any questions, and I'll turn it back to you, President White, for discussion and board consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Sanas. Is there a motion to approve the permit?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second? Manager Hajmati? Any questions? Yes.
This project, together with ponds at Highway 12, what kind of improvements have we seen in Tanger's Lake?
That's a great question, Manager Miller. I do not know the answers to that off the top of my head on what we've seen for trends in Tanager. I can get back to you on that and talk with R&M.
What other source does Tanger's Lake have besides Long Lake Creek?
I don't know the specific numbers, but it does have a pretty substantial TMDL. As you go down the Long Lake Creek subwatershed, each of those TMDLs has a bigger and bigger reduction requirement associated with it. It's a combination of internal loading, direct watershed loading that's coming in, downstream of Long Lake from that drainage area, and then it has a lot of associated reductions with each lake above it being able to meet its own water quality standards as well. So I apologize, I don't have that in front of me.
Is there considerable in the lake sources? Tanger's
I
Lake?
believe so in Tanager, yes, that their
Okay, so
internal loading
this
plays a
wouldn't have that much impact.
factor. Yeah, the project, the County Road 6 project with its 40 pounds of additional reduction is around 20% of that kind of direct watershed to Long Lake's part of its reduction, so 20% of that reduction.
Thank you. Anything, Manager Olson?
Two quick questions. Where the 7 drain tile segments drain into the ditch, what is the media that keeps that swale from eroding?
Sure. Wondering if I should. I'll just go back to here. So this whole bank, sort of underneath this, it's also, so that's going to keep all the sand put in. And then there's, drain tile is perforated to allow water. Choking stone and specific around the drain tile that prevents.
Okay. These two questions are directly related to the people that were visiting the night that we were there, and there was a lot of positive comment from the folks who live around the project. So I just wanted to follow up on one of them that was asked. The other one is, what are the steps to maintain that sand filter? Is that going to happen in 3 years? Is it going to happen in 6 years? What's the estimated time frame?
Yeah, President
what
White,
do we do?
Manager Olson, if you don't mind, I do have a slide on maintenance that we'll get into very shortly, and I'll touch on that.
Perfect, thank you.
I was asked a question by a community member, which is, no, she knew that turtles would burrow into the bottom of a waterway. And she said, is that taken into account when there's dredging?
So we have done the NHIS screening, so there should be no blanding turtle issues like we've seen on some of our other stormwater ponds. When we get a dewatering and water appropriations permit closer to construction, the DNR will guide us on any kind of best practice that they want to see associated with fish or wildlife associated with the pond.
All right, thank you.
That helps.
All right, are we ready to vote on the permit? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And next we'll go to Resolution 2527.
All right. Yeah, I realized I probably should have paused for design questions ahead of turning it over. I also wanted to note we do have 2 external permits out for this project, so one with the DNR and one with the Army Corps. We've been coordinating with them kind of since very early on in the project. They've been really supportive of it, so I don't anticipate any changes there, but still waiting to kind of receive those. So I'm going to continue on with the remaining content for 11.2, which has those 2 additional resolutions. I know it looks like we're halfway, but I promise we are over halfway. So turning back to the pond expansion, this work does require an agreement with the neighboring property, the Epleys, to grant us the ability to alter their land and to permanently place ponded water on their property. They have been great to work with and really supportive of the district's overall project, but has voiced since the beginning their preference to not have a formal easement recorded on their title. And that's why we're securing our rights through a standalone agreement versus a perpetual easement. And the final draft of that agreement is in your packet. So rather than receiving financial compensation, they had asked that we take advantage of the equipment on site and construct a walking path and landing pad to create a formal access down to the pond. That's illustrated here on the left. And so to help us evaluate that request, we followed a typical approach for kind of estimating the value of impacted land, starting with the appraised land value, and calculating the portion that we would be impacting with our project. And so since in this case we aren't obtaining a full easement, we kind of considered half of that value as kind of a guidepost to help us judge what would be a reasonable kind of exchange for us being able to expand the pond. So from there, we had worked with the landowners to develop shared expectations on what this path and landing pad would look like. And then from there, we worked with Stantec to build a budget around those expectations. And staff feel confident that we can deliver the requested improvements within the threshold that staff identified as reasonable. And we've also worked very closely with Smith Partners to make sure that the agreement is structured in a way that protects our investment, ensuring that long-term function of the pond is preserved through our agreement, but then also existing natural resource regulations, which would limit alterations by future property owners to the pond, since it is part of the DNR's public water inventory. At the same time, the agreement is designed so that we basically construct the landing pad and the path and step away with all future maintenance requirements falling to the landowner. Here's a final cost estimate based on the 90% plan set that does include the pond expansion and the walking path and the landing pad, with a total construction cost of $723,000. The cost estimate for the project portion does fall right in line with where we were at in feasibility. And then the pond dredging, we've broken that out separately because we do intend to pull that from the PMLM pond dredging fund. So the total retrofit kind of associated cost is $570,000. Getting to maintenance, because that does tie into kind of our life cycle costs for the project. Monthly, we do plan to have district staff out on site, largely to do an inspection of just the filter bench and drain tile network. We do envision maybe some light cleaning here of any material that we see sitting on the filter, but this will be a pretty mild kind of staff-led activity. Every year in the fall, we are anticipating getting out there, likely with a contractor, to do some raking or scraping of the very surface of the sand, with the thought that there might be built-up sediment or some scum that's settled on the top. More long-term maintenance will be when we need to replace portions or all of the media, and we're kind of thinking that on a more 5 to 10 year basis. And again, it's those annual visits that'll kind of help shape how quickly we're seeing buildup on the sand. And just like any other project, these activities will be kind of considered and rolled into PMLM's budget. Kind of turning to process a bit, like we do at the 90% kind of stage, we hosted a public meeting in proximity to the project. At Orono City Hall on Thursday, April 4th, we had about a dozen residents with representation from Long Lake Waters Association, 2 Orono council members, and 3 of our own board managers, so thank you for attending. And it was an open house format similar to East Auburn, just giving us an opportunity to share about the project, expectations and changes that the public can expect to see driving by the pond, and then really highlight kind of our partnership effort with the roadmap. So overall, I think a lot of positive and project support and general excitement that there won't be road closures associated with the project. So that went well. Looking ahead here, so assuming approval tonight of the 90% plans, authorization to go out for bid, and that landowner agreement, we would spend kind of the next month getting that agreement executed. We need to kind of line up notaries for that. Finalizing our bid package so it's ready to go out, and then just obtaining those final few permits from the external agencies. Our plan would be to bid this summer, July 21st tentatively. We're staggering this kind of 2 weeks after East Auburn, and that's intentional. And then that would put us back to award the bid and contract for that construction oversight work at the 28th meeting in August. Then spending kind of the fall and winter getting contracting set up, providing the notice to proceed, and beginning construction with substantial construction completed likely by March 15th. And we're thinking about an 8-week construction window for this project. All right, so with that, staff is seeking approval of Resolution 25027 and 25028, but happy to go back and talk through anything with design.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt 25027? Manager Sando, is there a second? Manager Hajmati, any questions regarding this resolution?
Yeah, is the walking path and the pad, is that class 5 or is that blacktop?
That's a great question. We did talk through materials. Right now, we have a range of options in the agreement that the landowner can pick from, all within a kind of a similar cost range. I think right now they are leaning towards, like a class 5 option.
And the maintenance, we don't have to maintain that?
No.
So once it's his, it's his?
Yes.
Manager Olson.
To expand on that, Is that crushed granite that we used out west one of those options?
President White, Manager Olson, I'm not entirely sure on the specific granite we've used. I think one we're looking at is a St. Cloud kind of granite class 5.
Yeah, the interlocking.
And it does well in areas that could get wet. So that landing pad is kind of in that potential flowage area. So
And is that landing pad a flat pad or is it on the hill?
it's going to be primarily as flat as we can make it. We're not really cutting into their bank. So I don't think I have a good picture nearby, but they have a really steep slope and grade to work with. So it limits kind of how far back that pad can sit and be cut in. So it'll have a little slope to it just to encourage draining, but largely flat.
Just a comment, I love the way that instead of a straight line on that western edge, we've got a curve going into that property. It's going to look terrific for the homeowner, and this combination of the solution is great. So thanks.
Yeah, when Nick was looking at, he's in the back, design, this is how I think the pond really was like meant to sit originally back in the 90s. It fits really naturally into the existing contours there, but at the time we just didn't have kind of that ability to do that.
Great.
Is that path open to the public?
Great question, President White, Manager Sandow. No, it's not. So this is all, even the pond, this is on private property that we have easement over, so there's no kind of public access to the pond or to this new path area.
Manager Hajmati.
When the, is that, how's the cleanup process?
President White, Manager Hajmati. What we envision is kind of to remove, the top 3 to 5 inches of sediment, you'd get a mini excavator on site coming through our maintenance corridor off County Road 6 and getting on top of the filter and scooping that out, and we would be replacing it with the clean sand.
Fresh.
Yeah.
What happens to contaminated?
That's a great question. Similar to the dredged material, we don't control where they have to take it, so it's kind of up to the contractor on where they find beneficial to use that material elsewhere.
So the contractor takes care of it?
Yes.
Mr. Meehan.
The fill that they do have to be considered so it can be used as fill some other development.
Oh, I see, okay.
So it's usually very it's just
So it's not really considered contaminated?
Right.
Can be used
Good news.
for, good.
Anything else? Those in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And then on Resolution 25028, which is authorizing land alteration of flowage agreement.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Long Lake Creek, we did a study when we did the Highway 12 ponds. Are we going to, is that in the work plan sometime in the future, James? The Long Lake Creek improvements?
President White, Manager Miller, I'm not sure what specific improvements you're referring to, but I think we've fielded variants of this question a number of different from the board over maybe the last 6 to 12 months. So inside, the board's adopted the Long Lake Creek Roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the Long Lake Creek Roadmap, it outlines all the water quality targets for the various water bodies that are north of Long Lake, for Long Lake, and for the corridor between Long Lake, south to Tanager Bay. And maps out capital projects, costs and sources, general responsibilities for cities. So I'm not sure what specific project you're referring to, but
Well, the
Never say yes.
remandering and the dump and all that other stuff. That
yeah, and we've provided a couple of updates on that. So, Manager Miller, we don't, within the Long Lake Creek Roadmap, we're not taking a lead catalytic role in every single project. On the dump site, the potential meander, we have had conversations with the private landowner that was looking to do a lot split. The board's been briefed on sort of the real estate considerations there. We did have meetings with leadership over at the city of Orono, which weren't willing to grant the variances necessary
Okay.
to
All right.
support
I
the work
recall that
happening.
now.
So We are positioned to, play a supporting role and make sure that project moves forward, but we're not actively
Okay,
engaging the landowners, the community, and make it happen where we sit on that one.
thank you.
Part of my administrator's report is later in May, we'll actually be in front of the city of Long Lake, talking about the Long Lake Road map. I think it's like May 9th. And outlining how we'll be leveraging state grant dollars to advance the feasibility work for Holbrook Park all the way to Nelson Side Park, and the corridor in between. That's really, other than County Road 6, that's the area that we're most focused, because Long Lake, as a city, sort of the hot spot based on when it developed, impervious levels of stormwater treatment. And so we've secured several $100,000s to advance feasibility work in partnership with the city of Long Lake for stormwater management between Holbrook and Nelson. That's really our second focus.
Thank you.
Another quick one. Earlier you said something about the DNR and the water and the Corps of Engineers. Is that a long process, or is that?
President White, Manager Maxwell, it can be. I think for this, the DNR is waiting to see the executed agreement with the homeowner to make sure that this proposed project of expanding onto someone else's property, that gets buttoned up. So they're kind of just waiting and ready to issue that once we send it over. The Army Corps is always a little harder to judge. They don't have as many, to my knowledge, kind of issue requirements, but we're working with someone really great over there. So I don't anticipate that being an issue getting soon.
Can they propose changes? Would they have to come back then after they propose, if they said, I don't know if they do or not, but
I'm sure they could. We've taken the same approach that we like people to take with us. So we had pre-application meetings with the DNR, Bowser, and the Corps really early on at like 30% to just understand if they're comfortable with the scope of the project, kind of what requirements they'd look to see. So we really don't anticipate kind of any last minute surprises
Thank you.
from them.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 25028?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Manager Hajmati. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Smith.
I don't want to interrupt any other questions, but I have a few comments on the landowner agreement.
That would be excellent. Thank you.
Normally, when the district is undertaking a project and we see a project impacting private land, we seek easements. And the reason we seek easements is because we want title to be recorded for subsequent owners, that the district's rights are protected. And my comments are not about this project, but for the landowners of future district projects who will be reading these minutes. I think we will still consistently prefer to have easements to protect the district's interests. In this particular case, we were able to work with a landowner, but there are several really unique aspects that render an easement really unnecessary. One is the natural terrain of where this is working and how it gets down to this low area, the excavations that's taking place. It's unlikely that someone is going to want to try to fill in that area or alter it. Secondly, the amount of incremental flowage change that is taking place here in terms of damage, compensable damages, is very small. And if really, in this case, with the landowner, fairly exchanged with the idea of this private path. And then finally, this area, this water body, will be continued to be regulated not just by the district, but also by the DNR. And that will, that regulatory protection would also protect the same interests the district would have, that it would maybe seek an easement. So I just want you to know that we are not requiring an easement with a landowner in this case, but we will continue to recommend in future projects that that's the preferred mode. But we've worked very well with this landowner, and these unique circumstances really render it unnecessary to insist on an easement.
Thank you.
well, you really think with the DNR and the watershed, we have enough oversight on it anyway?
Manager Olson?
Question for council. If we see these folks put out a dock just for a place to sit, is that possible?
Manager Olson, if you don't mind, I'll just chime in. We do have that specifically written in as like an exception within the agreement as something they would be able to do, as long as it would be tied to their side of the property before it switches over to John Newell's side, because we don't foresee that kind of interacting in a negative way with the pond's function as a stormwater pond.
So they could, from that pad, put out a little dock.
Yes.
and
And
have a
fish
picnic
from
there.
it, or,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving now to item 11.3, Resolution 25029, Ms. Neal presenting.
Okay. Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Tonight I am before you for item 11.3, requesting authorization to apply for watershed-based implementation funding. I'll start by providing an overview of the watershed-based implementation funding program, its purpose, and our role in the past. Then I'll discuss the 2 projects that were submitted for funding, and I'll go over what our partners recommended through the convene process and next steps before requesting that the board authorize district staff to apply for funding. Watershed-based implementation funding is a program of the Board of Soil and Water Resources to advance the state's water resource goals using targeted, effective actions with measurable water quality results. As the board likely recalls, initially the program allocated funding on a competitive project-by-project basis, but beginning in 2023, Bowser shifted its approach for distributing funds from the competitive grant model to a watershed-based funding model. So for this round of funding, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed Planning Area has been allocated $424,534 for the 2025-2027 biennium. Eligible entities in our watershed who can apply to use this funding include the district, Hennepin and Carver County, the Carver Soil and Water Conservation District, and municipalities. And with the new watershed-based funding model, the district has offered to run the convene process for the program, where we organize a group with representatives from each of the counties, the Carver Soil and Water Conservation District, and representatives from 2 cities to make collaborative decisions about which projects we want to apply for funding for and who will be the applicant and administer the grant. In the past, we have leveraged this state funding source to provide support to partner projects, often in connection to the LWP program, to help facilitate funding for partner-led efforts. In the last round of WBIF, our watershed planning area was allocated about $418,000. The convene group selected to split that funding between the Morningside Ravine Project and Holbrook Park feasibility, and requested that the district serve as the grantee and fiscal agent in order to facilitate additional transfer of funds between projects if needed. So in January, the district requested project submissions from eligible partners for the new cycle and organized a convene meeting to make funding decisions on April 9th. And similar to past rounds of WBIF, 2 projects were submitted for the funding for the current 2025-2027 biennium. The first project is the Cedar Bloomington Stormwater BMP, which came out of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board's Minnehaha Parkway Master Plan and is part of the partnership between the Park Board, Minneapolis, and the district to develop large-scale projects along Minnehaha Creek in Minneapolis. This site is on parkland that drains to Lake Hiawatha, which is impaired before reaching Minnehaha Falls. And the board will recall Cedar Bloomington from past discussions on the feasibility of 3 parkway projects as a part of the Minneapolis partnership. On February 13th, Gabe reviewed findings from the Parkway feasibility study with the board, including the Cedar Bloomington Stormwater Project being identified as the top priority and will be the first of the 3 projects to begin moving forward. The project will convert turf along Minnehaha Parkway into a multi-basin stormwater wetland, remeander a segment of Minnehaha Creek, and restore the stream bank and riparian habitat. Depending on the scale and layout of the stormwater wetlands, 20 to 40 pounds a year of phosphorus is estimated to be removed, in addition to providing flood mitigation for the surrounding neighborhoods for a total cost of $490,000 to $840,000. The second project submitted for funding is the Montgomery Avenue Area Drainage Project, which was identified based on a citywide scan of potential water quality improvements in the city of Deep Haven and has been under consideration for funding through the district's LWP program. This site drains first to Lake Louise before ultimately discharging to Lake Minnetonka. The board will recall from past LWP discussions that this project proposes to build an underground infiltration system beneath the parking lot at Calvary Church. The project is estimated to provide 7.8 pounds of phosphorus removal each year and provide flooding mitigation for the surrounding neighborhoods for a total cost of $588,000. This project was submitted and reviewed under the LWP program last year, and the board concurred in staff's recommendation to provide $125,000 in project funding support. As a part of this process, the board held a public hearing to consider project ordering and a minor plan amendment, but the next steps of project ordering and developing a funding agreement were put on hold while the city secured additional funding. Now the city has included 3 additional acres in the project's drainage area and is planning to commit $180,000 to $200,000 of their own funds, in addition to requesting WBIF to close the remaining funding gap. The WBIF convened group agreed that both projects were worth supporting. So based on their relative cost effectiveness and the level of support needed for both projects to move forward, the group recommended splitting the funding between the 2 projects and allocating $200,000 to the Montgomery Avenue project and the remaining $224,534 to the Cedar Bloomington Stormwater BMP. The group also recommended that the district serve as the grantee and fiscal agent for the funding in order to more easily facilitate reallocation of funds between the projects if needed based on additional feasibility work and cost refinement. So if the board authorizes district staff to apply for WBIF tonight, staff will submit a budget request and a work plan to Bowser by April 30th, and will bring back the WBIF grant agreement for board approval in May. We'll also begin moving the Montgomery Avenue project through the LWP process again, and will request that the board approve project ordering and a funding agreement in June or July. The next phase of the Parkway projects is design, and this summer, Gabe and the team will continue to negotiate roles for design and construction with Minneapolis and Park Board partners, and will bring back an additional agreement for board approval as well following that process. So with that, staff are requesting under Resolution 25029 that the board authorize district staff to apply for watershed-based implementation funding.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Manager Hejmati, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando. Any questions from Ms. Neal? I don't remember. Is the grant a reimbursement? We would spend the money and then be reimbursed?
I believe we operate as a pass-through for the Bowser funding, so I don't think I think the money that is spent is Bowser money. We don't.
Okay, thank you. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Resolution is adopted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now go to item 12.1, which is the permitting briefing. Ms. Sanas presenting.
Thank you, President White, Board of Managers, for moving this item into the board presentation. We didn't quite have enough time in committee, but as we've mentioned last month in March, the permitting program was before you all in committee to give a program update of where the department is at strategically and hear a bit more from the board about what you're interested in hearing from the department moving forward. So here to give some updates tonight as well. So first, I'll give a brief recap of the last committee meeting and some of the things we heard from that meeting, followed by some early metrics and trends from 2025. Then I'll cover some projects that you'll likely be seeing at upcoming board meetings. and then closing it with some updates on some external coordination work, and then any time for questions if you would like. At our last meeting, we talked a bit about that while the permitting department's work can be a bit hidden, it has a unique position within the district's broader strategic alignment. The department has many touch points with external stakeholders, has the opportunity to influence projects as they come through the program, and both implements and notices policy trends. And at the last meeting, we heard a lot of feedback in the three main areas of projects, policies, and relationships. Inside of projects, we heard that the board wants to keep track of major projects moving on the landscape and have a bit of lead time on what projects might end up at future board meetings as well. We also heard that it's important to flag partnerships, the coveted win-win projects, and talk about learnings that we gain from those projects and what makes them successful. There was also interest in spotting patterns in policy challenges and then reporting those back out. And finally, we talked about the importance of the relationship dynamics on an individual project and also on a larger scale as well. How we navigate conflict with partners and get to the yes in a permit, and what insights we can get from the wide variety of touch points that we do have. One of the things that we heard from the board back in March is that you'd like to understand a little bit more of the permitting data and the intake, flow, and distribution of the projects. So far in 2025, we've received 210 permit applications and issued 137 permits, some from 2025 and some that were carried over from previous years. And that permit intake is generally on par with what we normally see for this time of year, and a little bit above average, but generally on track. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the year about some of the higher level data of how our policies have performed, water quality metrics and whatnot, but tonight we just want to give a brief insight into some of that. And then in terms of seasonal distribution, here you can see the green line that shows where we're at right now in 2025 as far as the permits coming in. And the yellow is the last 4-year average amount of permit applications by month. Seeing these average trends, you can see that we typically see an uptick in May when construction season is starting, and then another peak in August once people are starting to get ready for winter, and then another peak in October when the last group of people are trying to get their project in before the ground freezes. And knowing these patterns help us be able to forecast, plan, and understand when we should target big inspection pushes, and when we'll have less permits coming in, so we're able to focus a little bit more on strategic initiatives. So, for example, as construction season starting, we're starting to ramp up our field presence as we onboard Jenna, our new permitting assistant, so that she's out in the field quite a bit this summer, being able to see how the projects that we permit are actually being implemented in the field. And then on a distribution basis, this isn't all of the permits, but you can start to see some interesting activity centers across the district. You can see in green the tear down rebuild cycle that happens in Edina quite often. We also see quite a bit of shoreline activity in Lake Minnetonka, with the area north of the lake seeing more lot splits and small subdivision projects. You can even see in the southwest corner some of those hotspots that are larger developments, like the one in the southwest. There is Woodland Cove, where it's now starting to get filled in with single-family home permits. And while there's still some expansion happening in the western part of the watershed, the majority of that expansion is now moving further into Waconia and is outside of the district, so mainly filling in some of those larger subdivisions too. And since we also heard interest in going over some major projects that are going on within the department, I'll briefly go over some of the projects that we might see coming before the board later this year as well. One upcoming project is a Minneapolis Park Board project that we've been working on, which is to redo the playground at Whittier Park. And due to a combination of site constraints and tying in with grades, The design is facing freeboard constraints and will likely need a variance. So wanted to get that on your radar, and we're working closely with them on that one as well. And then another upcoming project that the department's working on is the Idleville development. It's a 5-lot subdivision in Orono, which will require stormwater treatment, has wetlands on site, and a stream crossing. We're still working through the review and some of the technical details associated with the project, but we do know that there are some community concerns over the land turning over. So we wanted to let you know that this might be coming before the board as well. Then the last project that we wanted to highlight tonight as well is the TH5 project, which is the last big project in the Arboretum Transportation Area projects in Carver County. This project is tracking towards a floodplain variance, so we wanted to put this on your radar early as well. We're working closely with the project team, and we're expecting it to likely go before the board sometime later in the summer, early fall, as they're wrapping up some federal approvals as well. And to close with 2 updates on some of the relationship side of things as well. The policy team is doing their annual meetings with municipal and other agency partners, and at least one member of the permitting team is joining in most of those meetings so that we can be tracking city priorities and then also be aware of what city projects might be coming down the line so that we can coordinate with them early to have a smoother permitting experience. And another external coordination meeting that we're having soon is with the Metropolitan Council. So in the 1970s, a lot of the communities around Lake Minnetonka were sewered, and that infrastructure is now reaching life cycle and needing replacement. We've partnered with the Met Council in the past, as in projects such as the stormwater diversion, the Blake Road site, as well as the wastewater pond restoration as a part of the Long Lake Creek corridor improvements. We had an initial coordination meeting last year to discuss upcoming projects and opportunities for partnership. So now this year we're following up again to help with the permitting process, understand what projects will be coming through the department as well, and see if there's any good projects where there's areas for opportunity. Thank you again, President and Board of Managers, for inviting me to continue the conversation about the committee discussion. If you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time as well.
Thank you, Ms. Sands.
I just got a compliment. This is exactly what we wanted, to get a preview of what you're working on so that we can be prepared for seeing future good work on your part.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
For that, really, very thoughtful analysis, which looks at yourself, what's going on, relationships with people, with like design.
Thank you, Manager Heshmati.
I really like the way in which permitting is going beyond relationship.
Thank you. Yes, the entire permitting team has been talking a lot about how we can continue to move the department forward, and getting the board's feedback at the last committee meeting was very helpful as well.
I agree with what they said, so it's great, but just had a quick question. You said there was 210 applications and 173 were 110. What did I write down? 130, there was 210, 137. That means 73 are still in queue, or did some of them just back out?
Yep, yeah, so
Is
there's,
there a breakdown for that then? How many, and what's the reason why they back out? Is it because of the work? That's not our problem. I mean, is it because it's not available? They can't do some stuff? Or?
yeah, great question, Manager Maxwell. There's a couple of different reasons, and for those metrics, it's also not that all of the 137 permits issued are of those 210. We do see some staggered, like if a larger subdivision permit was came in 2024, that we're still working on that. And then some of the other reasons that a permit might apply but then doesn't get to issue, it's either if they apply and then realize that, oops, they didn't need a permit application, then we'll let them know and then the application gets canceled. Or if it's a larger project and we're still working through some of the submittals and getting them to meet regulations, that's another reason. And then also just some projects get put on hold. They're going through the city process for some reason. We talk to them, but then they don't continue on with their application.
So we know where all 210 are in
Yes,
the queue, but they're just numbers that are
correct.
there.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
To ask another question on what he just said, I get the word issued. What does received mean?
Good question, Manager Olson. Once we have a permitting portal on our website, which kind of asks folks about different questions about their project, and then they'll upload site plans, sometimes narratives based off of the project. And once they hit submit on that online permitting portal, then that's when it's received, it's come in. That's when we start reviewing it, and we'll give comments back to the applicant on these things are meeting the requirements, these things we need more clarity on, these things aren't meeting the requirements, here's how we can work together to get to that point of meeting the rules.
Okay, and then issued is,
Everything is great, here's your permit.
thank you.
Go home.
So 137 are good to go, and 210 we're working on.
Number 210.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
it. Item 13, are there any board inquiries, issues, or ideas to bring up this evening? Then Mr. Whisker, Administrator's report, please.
Thank you, President White, managers. Mattering of updates this evening, a few community touch points, some of which might save for a future board meeting. I'd just like to look ahead. So on April 30th, I think it was Manager Olson and the report out on Metro Watersheds. You mentioned the League of Women Voters that attended and that we've collaboration touch points with them. April 30th is their annual meeting. It's going to be hosted, I believe, at Capital Regions facility, and we've been invited to give some sort of keynote or introductory presentation around balanced urban ecology and some of our project examples. Foray into statewide watershed management. So look for that. We'll send a note out, and if folks are interested in joining. On May 19th, as part of our Minneapolis initiative, myself and a few other staff members from the project team and outreach team are going to be attending the Tangletown Neighborhoods annual meeting. I believe Councilmember Koski is going to be there giving an update, somewhat unrelated. We're going to be talking about the Watershed District's work up and down the creek, as well as outlining our work with the Minneapolis Partnership. And as a reminder, I think the Nicollet Hollow project, that is one of the top 3 that we're advancing through feasibility with the park board, sits inside the Tangletown area. I mentioned May 20th, we'll be at the Long Lake City Council meeting. We'll give you an update closer to the date for that, but we're going to be rolling out the roadmap, talking about the grant funding and how we advance project assessment from Holbrook to Nelson Park. And that's something that Becky and the project team have been sort of handing off. It's moving from policy planning to project planning to work on feasibility. We met with the city manager over there, Scott Wesky, recently to talk about roles and responsibilities. So some good progress. We've scheduled polls, and the poll results are in for the annual Citizens Advisory Committee capstone to onboarding and field trip with the board, Thursday, June 5th. 1 to 4 p.m. seems to be the date that works best for everybody. Hopefully we get glorious weather. Same thing, we'll send a save the date out for the board on that, and then closer to the date, outreach will provide a little bit of an outline on what the programming will be. Last board meeting, I think I mentioned, there's a statewide water task force being assembled by the Attorney General's office. I mentioned I might be interested in applying, and the board seems fairly supportive of that. The deadline's the 30th, so early next week, ahead of deadline. I did notice there was a little bit of a news release that came out. Senator Ann Johnson Stewart was appointed to that task force by the governor, so it's kind of interesting to see who's applied. You can see on you and who's actually been appointed. And then it's officially flow season in the creek. The ice is out, so are the stop logs in Grays Bay Dam. The lake has bounced up from 928.6, which is where we were at ice out, where we were at closing, to 929.1, with some of the snow melt, which was fairly limited and gradual this year, and then some of the limited precip that we've had. So we're still sitting about 3/10 below ordinary high water, and therefore the gates are closed. So the logs are out, but the dam is ready to be operated if we start getting more rain and the levels come up. We did get a 1/4 inch today. And so downstream at Hiawatha, it's responding largely to rain because the discharge out of the dam is bouncing between base flow of about 12 cubic feet per second and 40. Another little bit of an update. I know James McDermott Spees, Nick, who somebody said earlier, he's in the back. They've been inspecting Grays Bay this season, and there's going to be some maintenance programs, some of which we can probably do under administrative authority. Other elements might be back in front of the board for some contract work. Gate 1, right now, the logs are still in. We need to do some cable maintenance and make sure the gates are level. The cable's a bit short. We had a bunch of issues with cable slippage and set screws in the winter, so that needs to get fixed. The dam is fully operational with 2 gates. We can get maximum discharge, so gate 2 and 3 are operable. Once gate 1's fixed, we might fix some of the gaskets. There's rubber seals along the edges of the gates and on the bottom that stop seepage, and those are kind of showing some wear and tear, and so there's a little bit of flow around the edges. So once gate 1 gets tuned up, we'll take a look at gate 3 to do some similar cable maintenance, grease up the gearbox, and so that's something that they're looking into right now and planning for the season. Final thing, it came up this evening. Manager Miller abstained from the audit vote. My memory was a little hazy on this, but I put a message out to Tessa and Deb. We did have a discussion with the executive committee last year as to whether or not we should consider this practice that we've held for as long as I've been here, 20 years, of meeting without the treasurer to go through the audit and step through it. The executive committee does get essentially the same presentation that the board gets every year. And generally, the executive committee decided, and I think we actually communicated to the board last year, we're not going to do that anymore. We can certainly reinstate it. We could maybe make that a requirement if staff and the auditor are seeing issues. I think generally, with it being so clean and us making that decision last year, it escaped my memory too, Sherry, but that's why we didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Just a reminder, and we're happy to go back doing it that way.
And
Not
of
a
course,
big
it
deal.
was on the website by like 4:30 on Monday, so it was.
So if we want to do that, we can, and we don't need to decide that tonight. Just wanted to circle back to it.
Well, my concern is, there isn't a day you go by that you don't read about some nonprofit or government unit or something that has problems with accountability. And I don't think we can be too careful or too overcautious on our process. We got an outside firm doing our check writing, and then the auditor does the audit, and we got internal people. But I don't want to be associated with anything that comes up for any questions about how we're handling our money, because that's one of our principal responsibilities as a board member. And I think we should establish every kind of possible oversight that we can to make sure that there's no accidents in someplace. I'm sure everything's fine, but.
Okay, thank you.
It's related, otherwise I have one more update.
Go ahead.
So earlier in committee, we welcomed a new team member tonight, Owen. And at the same time, unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to a really valued team member at the end of May. Tessa Vasik's going to be leaving her role as operations manager for some personal reasons. Wanted to keep the board apprised as we look ahead. It's obviously going to be a really big loss. We've been processing that for a couple of weeks as a whole staff team. It's a big hit for Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, even bigger hit for me, and even
Deb, too.
and then even bigger hit for Deb. And so there's layers to this. Tessa's really allowed us to move past where Deb and I were coming out of the pandemic, which was white knuckle day-to-day survival operations. I think Deb did a phenomenal job keeping everything running, and we're anticipating that's still going to be the case. But Tessa's allowed us to scale past just keeping everything running smooth and think about how do we advance new initiatives. And she's been just a tremendous teammate and support role for Deb because I'm not as present as Tessa can be. So she's really helped us scale and run hiring processes and brought a keen HR eye and really understands what we're looking for culturally. So she's sat in a lot of the interview panels, which has given me free space and our leadership team free space, knowing that we've got her watchful eye on who we're inviting into the organization. And then she's been there with all of our new team members, laying out strong onboarding plans, not only within the programs, but how to welcome people into the organization and frame expectations and help make sure they're successful, moving up the learning curve really quickly. And as part of just our Vibes Committee, which runs our annual retreat, which we just had, that was focused on professional development. And so thinking about how we scale individual capabilities moving forward for the team. And so huge impact, I think, on people in culture, which we're going to miss. And many, many other things. She stepped into the role of IT when Alex left without missing a step. She's been just relentless on getting our board AV up and running. It's kind of a white knuckle ride tonight because they were replacing hardware right up until before the meeting. And she's done many, many other things. But we're starting to transition plan. There'll be plenty of time, I think, to say our farewells, but we wanted to give the board the same amount of lead time we have to process that and wish her the absolute very best as she.
Thank you. Did you have a question, Manager Olson?
No.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Tessa. We'll miss you.
But we're not missing you yet. Okay. Next item before us is 12.2, the 325 Blake Road Restoration and Redevelopment. In anticipation of going into closed session, I would allow people to move on with their lives. Except some people can't. Yes.
At least you didn't say.
Manager also said that I didn't say get a life.
The one couple slides back, the one you're talking about, and I don't know whether,
Yeah,
the
I didn't want to get
140 some cubic yards of oil they're taking out, and then she said the six, that was what,
we have 2
it
options.
was 6,
back
but
for
it
Tessa right away.
added up to
Would be the logical
134, so, or 136 and a 134.
I missed the numbers. I'd like to ask them.
That's not the big deal, I just couldn't remember. I was wondering if those numbers are supposed to,
And so
if they would subtract or equal the number at the bottom. They didn't.
If anyone would appreciate just a brief break, we could do that. I see Jessica's gone. Okay.
I think Jessica took it, whether we
Yeah. When
made it
you,
official or
when you
not.
need it, you take it, right? All right, let's go. Michael?
Good evening, Madam Chair, managers. As noted before you this evening to discuss 325 Blake Road and the ongoing negotiations regarding the purchase and sale agreement for a development portion of that property, and as such would suggest the board enter closed session, and if it so chooses, Lewis can lead the board in that effort.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, would you state the reason?
President, manager, the board. Or amendment of
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into closed session? Manager Hishmati moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell moves. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Now we'll move to item 12.3, the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk. Mr. Whisker. But more fun.
Yeah.
I forgot we were in open session.
Don't hold back your opinions.
All right, thank you, President White, Board of Managers. The purpose of this agenda item, I believe we're on 12.3 now with the
Yes.
adjustment in the agenda, is to discuss construction defects at the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk in St. Louis Park. We'll talk about the status of corrections and alternatives that have been proposed by the contractor, JTS. And hopefully we'll discuss the Watershed District's next steps in its negotiations with JTS, which will occur more than likely in closed session on advice of legal counsel from Lewis Smith, who will advise more when we enter closed session. So I'm going to provide a brief presentation, hopefully brief, to catch everybody back up on the background. And Lewis, is there anything else that you'd like to say on the onset? So I'm going to try to efficiently step through a recap of the scope of defective work, proposed corrections, and some of the next steps. So in about the second quarter of 2023, the Watershed District district staff communicated to city building officials that the project was nearing completion. That prompted an inspection. And that inspection by city building officials revealed a number of issues in the way in which JTS had finished its construction. That then precipitated a fairly large series of on-site meetings with the St. Louis Park building officials, JTS, who is the contractor, SRF, which is the design engineer, and the Watershed District, and I believe MITEC, who is one of the manufacturers of parts. Some of the brackets and hangers for JTS. And yeah, 2 years ago, President White. So these are the things that I had just said. And then after those meetings, in late June, after those meetings on site to walk through the project and look at issues, JTS retained legal counsel. The communications really started to dry up between them and us, and the progress on identifying any plan to resolve the defective work essentially ground to a halt. Come back to the chronology. I'm going to walk through this in steps. Within that same time period in 2023, our project maintenance team did undertake its own inspection of the site. This map shows where and how we inspected. Each of the lines here are a header or a pile cap. So they represent a segment of the boardwalk where we went through and looked for hanger issues. And you'll see pictures of this later. Nail conditions, where there may be shims and where there's gaps between the joists which support the boardwalk and the header. And just very briefly on the color coding, the southern section, which is the elevated section of the boardwalk, you'll see it's color coded green and blue. The green section we were inspecting, I think, before we fully understood the tolerance for gaps in the hanger manufacturer specifications between the header and the joist. And so there's some simple data in the green area about where joists exceed 1/8 of an inch gap. The blue section to the west, as we learned more and had more information, are much more detailed, and so we have measured the degrees of gaps. The north side, there's various color coding, but we can see all the exterior joists, but it's very difficult to get underneath because it's low profile, and so we have limited data without uncovering there. A lot of that data, this isn't for you to read, but I just wanted to put a snapshot. That data was logged, and so we have each header is numbered. For everything that we've actually inspected, we have accounting and missing nails, protruding nails, all the different defects and their occurrence at each joist. And while we don't have complete point-by-point inspection throughout the entire boardwalk, we've got valuable foundational data that we're able to extrapolate out into the rest of the project. So after we did those inspections, it was late 2023. JTS had been largely silent, and given the lack of progress since the summer and in dialogue with the board, I began to engage directly with JTS, their attorney, and started a basic level of discovery. We put together our internal team and linked our legal counsel with the design engineer and project staff. After some effort, I was able to open up dialogue with JTS, who up to that point hadn't been communicative and was communicating on through legal counsel. Also able to engage St. Louis Park to let them know I was going to be working on the project and that it had the board's attention. Through that period of time, SRF, our design engineer, assembled what we're now calling the defective work list, the DWL. JTS then stepped through that document over time, proposing solutions to each category of defective work. And in some instances, they proposed alternatives, building code and plan and specification. SRF then reviewed and provided comment through that defective work list. That became a written, living document for how we were orderly marching through JTS's plans to fix the problems. I just mentioned all of that back and forth was memorialized. This is just a screen grab of the defective work list. It's about a 20-page living document. It breaks down the defective work into categories. It identifies deficiencies against plan and spec. JTS's solution, it memorializes the engineer's review, and then it identifies in dated format JTS has agreed upon in writing a final solution that was presented. And that's a lot to read, so I've kind of broken that down into these 11 categories here of defective work, and I'll step you through what this means out on site through looking at pictures. But there's 11 categories of deficiency that we're aware of. 9 of the 11 issues are proposed by JTS to be brought back into conformance with the plans that they bid on and the specifications. So that would mean that there'd be no issues with the plans, no substitutions, no issues with code. And then the grayed out are areas, categories 2 and 4, where JTS then proposed alternatives to our plans and specifications, which then require our design engineer's approval. They also require, importantly, approval from the city building official because they're alternatives to building code. And we'll talk about why.
So the city needs to be engaged only on 2 and 4, but the other ones the city was okay with?
That's correct. As long as the corrections are back to plan and specification, which the plans and specs conform to building code, the city officials are comfortable with those as proposed solutions because it's effectively building it the way that it was supposed to be built.
Okay.
The city would have a role in overseeing and checking to make sure it was done right because they don't have a lot of confidence in JTS based on how they've performed. And we'll talk about why they've proposed alternatives. It'll sort of be revealed through these pictures and then the field test pictures that I have. So I'm going to go through this rather quickly so that we can get to the meat of the discussion. Defective work category 1, the hangers were not installed to the maximum fastener schedule. So on the hangers, you can see those dimples. Each one of those needs a nail in it. That's the hanger that JTS chose. They got to choose the hanger and our engineers got to approve it. They chose it from MITEC, which makes these hangers. The manufacturer specification says to meet these load requirements, all those nail holes need to be met. There's a lot of hangers out there and a lot of them look like that where they just didn't simply put all of the nails in. That would seemingly be a simple fix. Just go back through and nail them all in, but there's layers of how the defects work together. So that's number 1. The second is maybe it's max nailed, but they didn't drive all the nails in, so that needs fixing. Here we start to get into the hangers themselves. So this is a square hanger, an orthogonal 90-degree hanger, but it's installed on a joist that comes in at an angle. And so it's a skewed piece of timber because the boardwalk curves, but the hanger is a square one. And you're supposed to use the right angled hanger for the right angled joist, and that was part of the plan and specification. This is defective work category 5. So on the bottom in the center, you'll see what it's supposed to look like. Clean. Those are called inverted flange hangers, and you'll see why in a little bit. But the nailing pattern for those hangers is behind the joist. You can't see it. What JTS did is they put in a regular hanger and they modified it. They hammered it and bent it around the edge of the pile cap and then nailed it to the pile cap. The nails are supposed to be hidden behind that steel bracket and then covered by the joist. And so they used the wrong hanger and they bent it around the pile cap and then nailed it into the pile cap. Defective work category 6 is fairly straightforward. There's these, for the helicals where those are attached, there's supposed to be a helical plate that needs to be on there. Those would be put in. Here's another instance where they modified or just bent and put the wrong hanger in the wrong location and how it's conflicting with where the helical plate sits. These, again, are all things that they've proposed to just go back and fix to plan to specification. This is the opposite of the hanger issue I showed you earlier. This is a square joist, but they used a skewed hanger. So in some instances, you know, square with skew, and in other instances, skew with square. So just the wrong application of hangers. So it shows that they had the right hangers, but just put them in willy-nilly. Here's no hanger. So they toenail screwed a joist. This isn't prevalent throughout the boardwalk, but this is, there's 1 or 2 joists that we've noticed that there just wasn't a hanger and they've toenail screwed it. And here's an instances where it would have had to be installed properly to not conflict with the helical plate. On the hangers, there's a dimple on the bottom. This is called a toenail. And so there's a nail that goes through there. That prevents the joists from moving vertically and having uplift. And so that's a requirement of the hanger specification. They've proposed to go through and toenail all the hangers. So those are the issues where they've said, yes, we would go through and we would bring things into conformance with plan and spec. Then there are these 2 issues of gaps between the end of the joist and the pile bents, and hangers actually not having the right vertical tolerance. So the hangers are a bit low, therefore the joist is low, and therefore it's uneven, and those are supposed to be plumb with the top of the pile caps. And they used shims, and so we'll look at those now. So defective work category 2 has some subcategories, and in this instance, the manufacturer specification for these hangers says that the joist needs to meet the header with an 1/8 of an inch gap, which is, you know, relatively small. That is tied in some way back to International Building Code and the testing and listing for products, which says between a header and a joist, when you're testing the load-bearing rating of the hanger, make sure there is an 1/8 of an inch gap, because if that joist touches that header, you get transfer of load. So for testing the hangers, ASTM requires a slight gap so that the hanger is performing the load-bearing capacity header. That then cascades through into the hanger's specs, which is you can only have an 1/8 gap. And so there are many instances where there is a little bit larger than an 1/8 of an inch gap. The hanger manufacturer has done lab testing simulation, structural modeling, and computer simulation that SRS reviewed, that the city's reviewed on behalf of JTS to propose an alternative, which is if there's an 1/8 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch gap, they've shown through the modeling that the load specifications for SRF's design would be met or exceeded. So this would be a proposal that in this field condition, 1/8 to 5/8 would just be left. There are gaps larger than that. However, there are gaps that are 5/8 of an inch and larger. And for 5/8 and 1 1/4, the alternative that's been proposed is this steel joist extension bracket. And you can see here, and I'll show you pictures of the field test, it's a steel collar that wraps around the end of the short joist. It gets 6 through bolts and it closes the gap. And if you see in the top left inset, there's a metal tab the bracket sits on, and that carries all the load bearing. That'll be important when we look at the field test pictures, because they installed these custom parts that they proposed as alternatives incorrectly during the field test. And the final category is there are some gaps, relatively few. I think we have, this is from memory, but I think we have observed conditions less than maybe 6, where there are gaps greater than 1 1/4. In those instances, the timber itself, the joist would need to be, a new joist would need to be put in and cut and fit to the right specifications. So this is a category 2, where we have subcategories of deficiencies. 1 condition left in place, less than 5/8. greater than 5/8 with a joist extension bracket, anything greater than 1 1/4 new lumber. And that's JTS's proposal. The defective work category 4 is we've had hangers that were put in too low, and you'll see other pictures of this throughout the construction. JTS shimmed those joists up to make sure they were plumb. This is really just a concern with, the longevity. It's not, the joist is not properly seated inside the hanger. They've put it up on a piece of cutoff or an actual shim. And the proposal here to address this would be what they've called a load-bearing plate. It's a steel shim. It's got 2 holes in it. It would go underneath the joist and be screwed into the bottom of the joist, and you have metal-on-metal contact inside. City's perspective on this is, and I think ours too, is if you're replacing skewed hangers or orthogonal hangers, and you're going through with these joist extension brackets, there's so many instances where you're changing the hanger or changing the joist extension. You can correct for the vertical configuration by replacing the hanger properly. And so we'd want to see a limited application of shims because they wouldn't be needed. So those are the defective work categories where alternatives are proposed. These are the 2, to Manager Hejmati's question, with these custom parts that would require SRF to review and approve as the design engineer and building official approval. And there's a set process that the city building official goes through to review these as alternatives to International Building Code. You actually have to make an application and say these are alternatives to building code. That usually happens on the front end of a project, where you're proposing something that is not in alignment with building code. Here, it's obviously retroactive. MITEC, as I mentioned, the manufacturer, on behalf of JTS, has provided structural engineering and simulations to show that these parts maintained and exceeded design load requirements. That has been reviewed by SRF and found acceptable on an engineering basis, and JTS assembled that into a package that was submitted to St. Louis Park for review and approval. And that brings us to, after we got to that point, it was close to Q2 of this year to work through that process of what them working through the defective work list and proposing solutions for these alternatives. Because of the layering, the fairly complex back and forth dialogue. So in the second quarter, I began engaging with St. Louis Park building official leadership, essentially April to June. Had a series of meetings with the inspectors that were on site, directors and the building officials to catch them up on the defective work list, this presentation, essentially, the proposed alternatives. And then from June to August, JTS was putting together this alternatives package for city review, and then in September, we had a large meeting with JTS's attorney, the building officials at St. Louis Park, our design engineer, and myself at City Hall, and that was September 20th. We discussed all the alternatives, and this city, on the face of things, was starting to get comfortable, but hadn't initiated the review of the submittals. And we were really, this was our first coming together and then planning on these need to be tested in the field. The entire defective work list has been subject to, and the corrections subject to adjustment pending a field test. At the tail end of that meeting, after the city filtered out, our contractor, Mr. Smith, Jeff Smith, with JTS, got fairly agitated with our base position that we wouldn't be paying for these corrections. Based on the way that the contract's structured. So he stepped out of that meeting. In subsequent dialogue with his attorney, we really reinforced how clear the contract is, and the attorney empathized with us and let us know he was trying to keep things on track and on plan, and they would work towards a field test, which we really saw as critical for both SRF and the city feeling comfortable that these alternatives could actually be deployed in the field to correct the problem and not just be solutions on paper. It took about 60 days for JTS to develop a field test plan. That involved a jacking plan, which I'm going to walk you through in a minute, a proposal for jacking, how they were going to inspect, identify issues, repair those issues at 3 different locations across the boardwalk, 2 elevated and 1 lower. And that field test was completed on December 19th, 2024. So the working chronology. I'm now going to walk you through a field test, the field test of alternatives and what some of our observations were. So this was jacking. They worked up and down sections. I think the real JTS's proposed implementation would be larger scale jacking, but the idea is that they'd lift up one segment, but lift up segments next to it. So you'd have sort of 2 connection points that come out of those hangars, the rest of them elevated so that you're not straining the boardwalk, and then you'd go through and put in the right hangars and the right corrections. So this is just a picture of the jacking on the low section. This is what the jacking looked like at the elevated section. This shows why the jacking is important from underneath. On the outside, you can see those joists slide into the hangars, and the nailing is inside the hangar. You can't see it. So with the boardwalk seated, we know there's maximum nailing issues. You cannot see if they've max nailed the outside joists. So the biggest problem, what's taken so long, is how are we going to deal with the fact that we know you did not max nail this boardwalk on all the hangars we can see, and that every header, there are 2 connection points that are invisible. So it's either disassembly or a jacking operation to get visibility.
So it's like the furthest outside.
Yes. And so
wings.
here's what that looks like. This is a close-up. So this is the outside, left and right. You can see the nailing condition on the left. There's 4 nails out of, I think, don't quote me on this, 24 holes. 2 of them aren't nailed all the way in. 2 of them are all the way in. So on the field test, this is what we discovered, is that was the max nailing condition in hangars that are invisible. And so that's the challenge with the correction, is knowing that max nailing is an issue throughout. Every single one of these inverted flange hangers is what they're called, because the flanges are inverted inside and hidden. How are you going to get eyes on that and ensure that those corrections are made without disassembling everything?
Isn't it just a matter of taking the header off the side?
Well, there's railing, decking. So you either come from the top and you even then you're taking the railing, the decking, and then the joists have to come out.
Just to get access.
The joists have to come out of these
hear you.
hangars to see if they're max nailed.
Okay, thank you.
So you're disassembling the railing, the decking, and then taking the joists out, which is rebuilding the entire thing, or you're lifting it like this.
Yeah.
So through the jacking, those were exposed and then max fastened. That was part of the field test to see if that would work. This is what it looked like when it was completed. Part of JTS's narrative throughout is that the reason they didn't max nail is the very outside flange. These flanges here, when they were nailing those in the field, would have nails sometimes protrude from the So they said that when we opened it up, we saw all of the inside ones either. Even so, it wasn't a reason. What we showed is that even without pre-drilling, using screws, we didn't have protrusion on
Did they explain why the nails were sticking out, the ones that weren't all the way in?
No.
They didn't pound them in.
And they're using a nail driver.
Nail. So if they hit a knot,
yeah,
just resistance, that's it.
Yep. We also, so that's the flange hang, and I wanted to pause there because those inverted flange hangers are the crux of why this is, because you can't see them. We tested the shims, which were affixed to the underneath of the beam. So here you can see those being installed with the 2 screws and the tabs, and then the joists get lowered back down. You have that steel. While the corrections were installed in these sections, JTS decided not to move the railings, and they didn't scale the jacking to the full extent they would have through implementation. And we saw strain on the elevated section of the railing here as you come off Creekside Park, and that caused one railing post to have splitting. We also see in some of the lower joists, they have friction against the pile cap. You've got expansion and contraction of timber as a product. Those joists are sitting against the pile cap, so when you're lifting them up, the very bottom of the timber is some of the
That's the way.
joists is you getting tear out.
Yeah.
And so the solutions worked, but there's issues that come along with implementing them. And so there's a discussion of when this happens, and this is what we discussed with JTS and the city. The expectation is those timbers all need replacing, the railing posts and the joists. So while the parts work, maybe the field conditions, but also the deployment of the methods, we ran into some issues that need to be addressed through an implementation plan. So this is the lower section of the boardwalk. This is where we tested that steel joist extension bracket. So we just walked through the inverted flange hanger and the shims. The shim is one of the custom parts. The joist extension bracket is the other alternative part. So here's a picture on the left, just as a reminder, and that top left picture is that steel tab. And on the right is how they installed it, which is you can see where the steel tab is. This steel tab is supposed to poke down, and this is elevated, and all the pressure is on that tab. Steel tab's here. Steel bracket is supposed to wrap around the edge. Here you see the bracket is not all it up. So we identified that in the field. We brought these plans, and they ended up, having to pull that off and put it back on, which caused unnecessary drilling and through bolting through that joist. So there's a joist that would need to be replaced. Ultimately, the part works great if you put it on properly. So that does functionally close the gap. Here you can see the size of the gap, the skew, and how that steel marries up with the header and how it closed the gap. But that's really the operation, is you have to painstakingly lift this thing up, see those hidden flanges, nail them in, go through, put the right hangers on, and where you have gaps, you got to drop these steel brackets in. The alternative to that is disassembling it and putting it back together. So this gets us to where we are now, which is the, first and into second quarter of 2025. So after the field test, we did hold a comprehensive debrief at City Hall with everybody. We sent field test debrief notes on February 3rd, and we outlined the need for an implementation plan that would adjust for what we'd observed in the field test. So this is where are you staging, how big is your crew, what's the jacking operation, how do you have parts on hand, what's the chain of command for inspection, correction, those sorts of things. And so we communicated that on February 3rd, and then subsequently on February 20th to integrate the alternatives into the contract documents and get the city approvals process going. We issued a change order for JTS to sign. That's a precursor, or has been so far, for the city to say yes, they want to see it integrated into the contract docs. After that, on April 1st, we received a draft implementation plan, which we've provided some feedback on. It's incomplete. It doesn't address the outline that we provided and answer all the questions that we need answered for how this would actually get implemented in the field. And accompanying that, we received a letter that outlined demands from JTS of us for correcting the work. And this is where I'd pause and have Lewis comment on that and guide the board if it chooses into closed session.
Before we do that, maybe if there's any questions on any of the material James has presented so far, we should have that discussion. Open session.
Well, if many of these holes, the nail holes, did they have to seal those back up again, or are they just open now for moisture and else get it because the wood will just rot?
Manager Maxwell, you're asking if they removed a hanger and then put it back on.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
They had to take the screws out, or add more, and some of the other, once they place it there, there'd be different holes all over. Did they have to seal up those holes?
Where they're replacing hangers, they're required to not nail it back on, but actually use screws. So that has been the corrective action that's proposed. And so in instances where the hanger needs to simply get replaced, they're using screws that are larger than the pilot hole. In an instance where you're putting the hanger on and you may be changing the elevation and the holes don't perfectly line up, they're screwing it, and those holes are going to be covered by the flanges of. So that, yes, there'll be holes left.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would think they'd have to seal those up.
There may be field
Talking
treatment
some-
required, and we have, that's a question for the implementation plan that we've outlined, is how are they handling when they made cuts in the field, the initial time, there was a requirement for treating cut ends.
That's what I was going to bring up, and that is, one, the only thing I saw up there that I really liked was consistent, good health of the wood. That wood that was specified and the way it was treated looks terrific in the photography that you have. The other comment was that the ends, wherever they made a cut, were supposed to doped up or whatever. So I don't know that a leftover nail hole is what he's asking about. It's unused. Would that need to be doped up? I don't. But I do remember that wood had to go through a process.
Yes.
Was he not licensed, bonded, and insured to the city, to the state?
Yes, is considered Manager Maxwell a responsive bidder and is bonded.
Oh, can we go after them, the bonding
I
company?
think some of those conversations are, how we want to respond to JTS's requests or demands, or what it would look like financially for them to implement the corrections is probably a question for closed session, how we'd like to respond to that.
Okay.
We can go into closed session for personnel evaluation, for sale of property, and for existing litigation.
Then, in order to receive confidential advice from your attorney concerning litigation strategy. That's what I'm about to speak.
And you
Okay.
have an April 1 letter with a threatening law.
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Okay? I'm going to take a little bit more time, managers, to respond to Manager Olson's question and walk you through. The letter that I think you've all received was sent by JTS attorney on April 1st, and it made specific demands on the district. It said that, in essence, in order to complete the work, they not only want to be paid everything owed under the contract, about $238,000. They aren't recognizing any deductions for any expenses incurred in these last 2 years for liquidated damages. And on top of that, they are demanding $250,000 in addition beyond the contract. They are also saying that if we can't agree to that, or some reasonable version of that scenario, then they sue. His words are that he's authorized to pursue litigation. So we've had, as you know, I'm quite conservative about use of the closed session under the open meeting law for attorney-client privilege. And that is because the Minnesota Supreme Court interprets the open meeting law in favor of openness. And when there's a close question, they're going to lean toward open public discussion. And some of the kinds of cases they've encountered that are similar involve a city council reviewing a land use application where the applicant made a threat of litigation in the context of that application. And ultimately, after the district court found a closed session authorized and the Court of Appeals did, the Minnesota Supreme Court said, no, you needed to stay in open session to consider all the requirements of the permit. Litigation considerations aren't one of the legitimate considerations in the permit. So we are not in a permit setting here, and we have been through a very intensive public process throughout all of the contracting and all of the review of these remedies. And so that is all out for open view. The Minnesota Supreme Court has also recognized that there are phases of the litigation process where strategy is impaired if the discussion occurs in public, where it's available for the opposing party to hear and to consider, and it goes to a matter that's more to their private gain than to the public interest. And I think that's the situation. We've reached the point of your deliberations and discussion where now what's left is to discuss this claims made by JTS, threat of litigation to pursue them, and your need to evaluate those claims and your defenses and your strategic options in terms of whether you continue to pursue a remedy under the contract with them, or also under the contract, pursue a default proceeding, which is a contested proceeding and using the surety. And so we think now is the time to go into closed session for discussing those specific issues, which are really only considerations of strategy, where your confidential advice from your attorney can guide you without the benefit going also to the opposing party to hear all that. For those reasons, we recommend a closed session just for this narrow purpose of considering your strategy for evaluating these claims and defenses and your options.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Is there a motion to go into closed session for the
So moved.
prescribed purpose? Manager Olson, is there a second? Manager Hmadi? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in closed session. Meeting adjourned.
There's no